Why? لِتَعَارَفُوا, to know each other, to recognize each other. إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. The most honorable among you is the sight of God, and the most pious of you. This verse in Quran, as other verses in the Holy Quran, concentrate on a really very important point that today we need it. We need to work on it. Imam Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam also says, الناس أعداء ما جهلوا. People are enemies of what they don't know. Sometimes you need to take the step. You need to move forward to introduce yourself, introduce what you have in your mind. So that will not only protect you, but also will bring the peace and bring the security to the community in large, irrespective of the ethnicity or religion or whatever. Here, when we talk about coexisting or living with each other, because sometimes coexisting word maybe doesn't give the right meaning. It's similar in Arabic. When you say ta'ayush, you feel there's some power, someone force you to do ta'ayush, coexisting. But when you say living with each other, al-aish al-mushtarak, that gives you more initiative, gives you more, you feel more comfortable to play with it, to go with it. However, as the fact of matter, I think there are 4 elements. We cannot ignore them. We are part of it. They are part of us. Number 1 is the ethnicity. We have different ethnicities. We like it or dislike it. We have different ethnicities, and this multi-ethnicity forces us, wants from us, to coexist and work with each other. It doesn't work today with this world. Every ethnicity wants to take back step, and they say, just we are here and you have to be in your town and your place and your idea and your whatever. Today we are all in one target, under same circumstances and same challenges. All of us, we are facing same challenges. That's why we need to work together and understand and take some good example from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as tonight we will hear from Dr. Morrow, inshallah. So number 1 is ethnicity. We cannot ignore it. It is there. Number 2 is different background when it comes to intellectual or political background. That's normal. Every one of us, every group of the community, they have some understanding, they have some background understanding, they have different agendas. And it is there. No one can ignore it. We as a human being, we have it. Always, everywhere you go in this world, you will see it clearly. So no way, we have to accept each other, even we disagree with each other. Even we have totally different agenda against each other. Third one is the belief, religion, faith. People somehow, I know, there's a lot of talk about agnostic, about atheists, but still the majority of the world, the majority of the people in the world today, they have a belief. They believe in some religions. They have some faith. So this diversity of faith, diversity of religions also is there, and we cannot ignore it. So it is part of it. We have to admit it. And the 4th one is the school of thought. We put this Jewish school of thought of each single religion. As we see Muslim or Islam and Christianity and others, they have different school of thoughts. We as a Muslims, since over 1400 years, little bit less than that, we have different school of thoughts. We had a lot of blood. It was bleeding always. we had disasters, we had bad history when it comes to sectarian violence. What happened after all of that? Today also, these years, we are seeing media everywhere. They insist on sectarian violence, and they bring this issue to even peaceful communities, just to let them get in and fight with each other. We need to stop this. And I think we are capable, and there is an opportunity to work together as a Muslim and non-Muslim as well to stop that. These four elements are very important, and they are there. Ethnicities, that's fine. Our grandfather is Adam, alayhi salam. He's our grandfather. So there is no real difference between all of them. Religions, lakum dinukum waliya din. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala insists in so many verses in Quran. That's fine. All what you need, have the right belief based on your understanding, and don't ignore others. Everyone has his or her understanding of religion, of faith. Respect. All what you can do, talk about your religion. That's fine. فَذَكِّرْ إِنَّمَا أَنْتَ مُذَكِّرْ. Your job is just remind people, talk to people. أَعْدَى مَا جَهْلُوا, as I mentioned, Amir al-Mu'minin alayhi salam said, just introduce it in the right way, because if you, the right person, you don't introduce your religion as it is, someone else will take the initiative, and someone else who is not qualified, or maybe has different agenda or wrong agenda, will demolish your knowledge, your value. From here, we see a good example, or maybe good examples, from Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Not only the Medina covenant, but also we have Najran covenant. A delegation came from Najran. They went through Yemen and other cities. They came to the city of Medina. They met with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they brought a letter from their bishop in Najran. And Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he wrote a letter, and that letter was a covenant, was an agreement, type of agreement. Very fast, I'd like to read some of it. Says, Min Muhammad al-Nabi, from Prophet Muhammad to Lil-Asqaf Abil Harith. His name was Abil Harith. The Asqaf means bishop. وأساقفتي نجران وكهنتهم, and priests, ورهبانيتهم وأهل منعهم, and so on. So, وكل ما تحت أيديهم من قليل أو كثير. Whatever they have, even small things, even nothing stuff, still that has value. We will respect it. He says, لا يغير. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has the government, has the authority. لا يغير, will not change any. أسقف من أساقفته, any bishop from bishops, ولا راهب من رهبانيته, ولا كاهن من كهنته, no priest, no bishop. I will do nothing, I will change nothing. ولا يغير حقا من حقوقهم, ولا يغير حقا من حقوقهم, ولا سلطانهم. I'm going not to change anything, no rules, nothing, and even the rights. ذلك جوار الله. This is very important. ذلك جوار الله وجوار رسوله أبدا ما تحصوا وأصلحوا عليهم غير متقبلين ظالما ولا ظالمين. I will give and I will be committed to this promise as long as no one attacked on each other. There is no oppression. You will be in jiwar Allah wa jiwar Rasulih. As a neighbor has right to another neighbor, you will be my neighbor and I will take care of you. I promise to not take a lot of time, but allow me please to mention this, because so many times people talk about it, and some non-Muslim Go YouTube and see, there's a lot of things really needs to be fixed and to be answered. One of them, they say Quran, your Quran say, and describe Christians as lower hand, and you as a Muslim are better, and they have to pay the jizya tax, and وهم صاغرون, as the Quran says. صاغرون, and what? They are not second hand, but also they are nothing. Based on the force, they have to accept it. This is what the understanding, or more understanding, or some people like to put it in this way. Why? We have to recite the entire verse. We cannot cut part of the verse, one phrase of the verse, and we use it. That doesn't work. The entire verse starts with, it is Quran Kareem, chapter 9, verse 29. Start with this word. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قاتلوا. Say fight. Fight. قاتلوا الذين لا يؤمنون بالله ولا باليوم الآخر ولا يحرمون ما حرم الله ورسوله ولا يدينون دين الحق من الذين أوتوا الكتاب حتى يعطوا الجزية عن يد وهم صاغرون. So, قاتلوا, fight with whom? Those, they don't follow their real religion, number one. Number two, they don't have belief in Allah, the day of judgment. وَلَا يُحَرَمُونَ مَا حَرَمَ اللَّهِ, and they don't care about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked them to not do. وَلَا يَدِينُونَ الدِّينَ الْحَقِّ مِنَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, specifically a group of the people of the book, until they humbly, this is the true translation. We have another problem with translation, Quran Kareem. Until they humbly pay the tax and acknowledgement that is the authority. Let me explain it in half a minute. Christians with Muslim, non-Muslim with Muslim, as they have one city, one state, one country, they are brothers and sisters and they are equal, 100%.
غير المايك السيد. بالي.
So, even Islamic government, during the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ government, and any true Islamic government, if there is, it must be, it is not a choice, it must give equal rights to everyone, based on what? Based on their belief? No, totally. I'm telling you, no. Based on, as a citizenship, based on a citizen. You are a citizen of this land, of this country. You and I, he, she, everyone else, we have same right and same responsibilities, same duties. Islamically, I'm talking, not only from a different point of view or different perspectives. If we see something doing Umayyads or Abbasidis or Ottomans, or today some countries they call Islamic countries, that does not represent Islam, true Islam. We have to go back to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to see the true Islam. That is the real Islam. Now, if a group of non-Muslims, they fight, they don't accept the system, pay attention. Who will pay the jizya? وَهُمْ صَاغِرُونَ عَنْ يَدٍ وَهُمْ صَاغِرُونَ. Who will pay the tax? Everyone, every citizen pays tax. Muslim, non-Muslim, no problem, no matter. Why they have to pay something extra tax, jizya? Because they fight. Now when Prophet Muhammad was able to control them, he gave them opportunity again. See the mercy of Prophet. He said, even you leave this country, go somewhere else, or you want to keep your citizenship here, that's fine. But because you fight with us, we need to keep the security. We have to secure you. I can't say all Muslims will be happy with you because you killed. You have a problem. Now, I will help I will give you security with this. Number one, accept the authority of this state. Okay? Number two, you have to pay extra tax to secure you, to bring the security to you, to bring the peace for you. This is the true translation, and we have it from Quran al-Karim. So, dear brothers and sisters, dear scholars, ulama, community leaders, please, we need to work on this. Today, we have so many challenges. I know Muslims aren't going. Islam is everywhere, alhamdulillah. But not every Muslim is a real Muslim, can translate Islam in the right way to others. We have to be careful. Specifically we, I mean with me, the followers of Ahlul Bayt, who their school of thought established on rational and on logic. We have to be in front, otherwise we will give the opportunity to others, and we will lose the opportunity. We will leave it to others. We know Islamophobia is there, and media is working really dirty way to put Islam in bad way, and Muslim bad. We were just talking there before we come here. Some non-Muslim people, when I see good Muslims, they say, oh, really, are you Muslim? Really? You are good people. How come you are Muslim? You are good, how come you are Muslim? We need to work on that. I know this is the big challenge we have. I know there is a type of increasing and decreasing. Increasing in agnostics, maybe, in atheism, maybe. Some studies, they claim that. And there's some type of decreasing in following religions. I don't believe that, but as statistics say, this is another challenge. If we don't show the real Islam, the real Muhammad, the real message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these challenges will continue. I think it is our responsibilities all. It is not me, it is not Dr. Morrow with his great work he's doing on. It is not you and him or her, all of us. كلكم مسؤول وكلكم مسؤول عن رعيته. As the Prophet ﷺ says, everyone is responsible. Please let us help each other. Please put aside our fragmentations, put aside our differences or our personal or group agendas. It is not the time, not the right time to move forward. We need to work carefully, one hand close to each other, to show the truth to humanity. And inshallah, we will be positive and part of the solution, part of the problem. I leave you with our noble guest, Dr. Morrow, and listen to him and learn from him. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Once again, I'd like to welcome Sayyid al-Ulama. Thank you for being here today. I also...
Can you use this?
This one?
Okay, use it.
Yes, it's working now. Thank you. I also like to welcome, maybe he doesn't like me, so...
Looks good.
Yeah. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
It's working.
It's working now? Okay.
No.
All right. I also like to welcome Dr. Fawaz with us, Nasif Fawaz, Dr. Nasif Fawaz, Dr. Muhammad Ghaili of the Harakat Amal. And I would like to welcome the Consul General of Lebanon, Sayyid Wasim Ibrahim. Thank you for being with us. I would like to welcome Sayyid Hamid al-Sadr of the Sadr Foundation. Thank you for being with us as well. And I want to thank also the media that's with us today and helping us with this program. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for being here. And to continue with the program, our guest, Professor John Morrow, was born in Canada. He received his PhD from the University of Toronto, where he studied Hispanic, Native American, is that correct to say Native American? Native and Islamic studies. For 2 decades, he taught at 6 universities and colleges and has a research fellow at the University of Chicago, Purdue, and Harvard. He has received several awards awards and recognitions, including a certificate of special congressional recognition from the U.S. House of Representatives in 2017. He has authored numerous books and articles, including The Covenants of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of the World, which has been translated into Spanish, Italian, Arabic, and Indonesian. Okay. I guess this is working now.
Sort of.
He co-directs a mental health and foster care agency and co-directs the Covenants of the Prophet Foundation, a non-profit interfaith organization, lectures around the world, works as an analyst, and acts as a religious and political advisor to the world. I strongly recommend you take a look at his website. It includes a lot of great information and good lessons to learn. Please, without further ado, please help me welcome Professor John Morrow. بعد الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
In the name of Allah, the Creator, the Just, in the name of Allah, the Creator, the Just and the Compassionate, praise be to Allah, the Loving and the Gentle. May the peace and blessings of Almighty Allah, glorified and exalted be He, be upon the father of Fatima, Muhammad, the son of Aminah and Abdullah, and upon his purified progeny, the people of the house of prophecy. As there is no thanking Allah without thanking people, I would like to thank everyone at Imam for inviting me to address you on this sublime occasion, honoring the birth of the most noble messenger.
Yeah, we can hear you anyway. We can hear you. We
Well,
can hear you.
Okay, well, maybe we could just forget about the
Yeah.
mic. That's
Yeah.
fine. All right.
Yeah.
So, I will use my deep voice then, and we will begin. So, in the name of Allah, the Creator, the Just and the Compassionate, praise be to Allah, the Loving and the Gentle. May the peace and blessings of Almighty Allah, glorified and exalted be He, be upon the father of Fatima, Muhammad, the son of Aminah and Abdullah, and upon his purified progeny, the people of the house of prophecy. As there is no thanking Allah without thanking people, I would like to thank everyone at Imam for inviting me to address you on this sublime occasion, honoring the birth of the most noble messenger, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, with special gratitude to our respected scholar, Sayyid Muhammad Bakr Kashmiri, and all of the ulama who are here with us today. As Almighty Allah, the most merciful, proclaims in the glorious Quran, we have indeed in the messenger of God a beautiful pattern of conduct for anyone who hopes, whose hope is in God and the final day, and who engages much in the praise of God. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. The Arabic word uswa means pattern. It refers to a role model worth imitating and emulating. It refers to a person from whom one takes an example. Such a person is an exemplar. Clearly, no person deserves to be emulated more than Muhammad the praiseworthy. The problem, however, is that we have tended to focus on Muhammad the microcosm as opposed to Muhammad the macrocosm. We have imitated him in the minutiae, small and minor details, even trivialities, while ignoring the essentials, namely the most important factors. We seem to have forgotten the bigger picture. So what better time to re-examine the birth of Islam than on the birth of its messenger? Perhaps we can gain some insight on the methodology of Muhammad, salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Prior to receiving revelation, prior to receiving the Quran, prior to publicly declaring his prophecy, prior to the rise of Islam, Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was actively engaged in confronting and addressing the critical issues of his time. As a child, he objected to polytheism, idol worship, and human sacrifice. It was unconscionable. As a teenager, he objected to the promiscuity that was prevalent in the culture of his time. As an adolescent and as a young man, he objected to slavery. He objected to feudalism. He opposed exploitation. And he was horrified at the objectification and exploitation of women. He was concerned about social justice, morals, and ethics prior to calling people to Islam. Most notably, Muhammad was involved in Hilf al-Fudul, the League of the Righteous. It called for justice for all through collective action. It was inspired by legal systems that prevailed in Syria and Abyssinia. So it found its inspiration in Christian cultures. The League of the Righteous sowed the seeds of liberty and democracy. Although it was pre-Islamic, it proved that ethics are universal. As Tariq Ramadan has mentioned, we can derive 3 principles from this pact. Number 1, Islam embraces values derived from the human conscience that are not limited to the Islamic tradition. This is because Muhammad had acknowledged the validity of a pact before the arrival of revelation in the pre-Islamic era. Number 2, Islam acknowledges the righteousness of non-Muslims. In this case, the non-Muslims had defended justice and the oppressed. And 3, Islam, instead of building allegiance to a closed community, requires allegiance to a set of universal principles. The message of Islam is not a closed value system or at variance or conflict with other value systems, assuming that they are based on righteousness and do not violate the human conscience, which is the intrinsic presence of Allah within the human microcosm, the fitrah. So what lessons can we learn from the League of the Righteous? We learn that following in the footsteps of the Prophet also includes following in his footsteps before he was declared a prophet. We learn that right is right and wrong is wrong regardless of religion. We learn that Deen al-Haq, the religion of truth, and Deen al-Fitra, the religion of primordial human nature, is eternal, while religions are time-bound. All religions, Islam included, must always strive to align themselves with perennial wisdom that has always recognized nature. Being a Muslim is not synonymous with being rightly guided. Many Muslims need to return to the straight path that lies within human nature itself. The entirety of the Quran is dedicated to reminding us of primordial religion of the human form. As Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam said, do not judge people based on how much they pray and how much they fast. Judge them based on the way they treat other human beings. I could not care less about how religious a person pretends to be. I care about one thing and one thing alone, character. So when it comes to dealing with other human beings, which is how we should see one another first and foremost, we must stop seeing them first as Hindus, Buddhists, Jews, Christians, Muslims, and so on. Once, when the Prophet was in Medina, a funeral procession passed by. He stood up out of respect. His companion was surprised. But it's the body of a Jew, he said. The Prophet corrected him. It was a human soul. We have plenty of people like the one who raised this objection in the Muslim community. But they're Sunnis, but they're Christians, but they're Jews, but they're secular. but they are human beings. That is all that needs to be said. We are concerned about issues. We are concerned about morals. We are concerned about ethics. And we should be willing to work with anyone and everyone who is working on these concerns. If we are fighting against domestic violence, which, by the way, is a huge problem in certain Muslim communities as well as non-Muslim communities. I've just authored a book on the subject that will be published shortly. If we are fighting against sexual abuse, if we are fighting against homelessness, if we are fighting against substance abuse, what does it matter if our partners in the struggle are black or white, straight or gay, Muslim or non-Muslims? Let us agree to disagree on secondary issues and work together on primary issues. Muhammad never said, I will not work with you on promoting justice because you are pagans. No, he said, let's work together on promoting justice. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
The Prophet preached for 13 years in Mecca. He called people to God, and he called them to righteousness. He actively opposed oppression. He stood by the side of the weak, the downtrodden, and the exploited. Read the Meccan surahs. They sound exactly like Jesus. They cultivate spirituality. They develop ethics. They oppose evil. They give hope to the hopeless. They stand with the poor. They condemn the rich. They promote tolerance and religious pluralism. To you, your religion, and to me, mine. They plead with the people to care for the orphans, feed the indigent, and supply neighborly needs. They call for food against hunger and security against danger. They call upon people to give regular charity. They call upon people to free the slaves. They encourage social solidarity. They promise justice in the next life, and they strive for justice in this life. It was all about promoting the good and forbidding the evil by action, and by words only when words had the force of action. So what do when we are weak and oppressed? We fight the darkness with light, inner light. We focus on faith. We focus on deeds. There were no ritual prayers in Mecca. There was no fasting. There was no hijab. It was perfectly acceptable for people to go around naked. In fact, it was even expected. So forget about these inaccurate movies you watch. Men and women circumambulated the Kaaba in their birthday suits, butt naked, okay? The people were such sexual degenerates that I cannot give you the details. Otherwise, astaghfirullah, this lecture would be X-rated. And forget about this foolishness that the Arabs used to bury their infant daughters alive. Yes, they did that, but the facts are even more disturbing. The reality was much sicker than that. They used to sacrifice them to their pagan gods, just like the Mayas, the Aztecs, and the Baal worshippers of the Middle East. They would slit the throats of their babies, cover their idols in their innocent blood, and then cast their corpses to hungry beasts. This was the environment in which Muhammad was raised. It was shameful. That is why later, more civilized Arabs did not delve into the details of the days of ignorance. It embarrassed them. But that was the sickness of the old world, of Mesopotamia, of Greece, of Rome, of the Americas. The Prophet's approach was grassroots and bottom-up. It was nonviolent and turn the other cheek. It involved exile, seeking refugee status in Abyssinia, the land of a Christian king where no person was wrong. It found common ground with people who shared common values. The Prophet made a pact with the Christians of Abyssinia. He is reported to have made covenants with the Christians of Najran and the Armenian Christians from Jerusalem prior to 619. So if he received revelation in 610, that would be 3 years prior to the Hijrah. he was making treaties and covenants and alliances with other communities that shared similar values. He also reportedly met a delegation of Berber Christians from Morocco who embraced Islam at his hands. So what was he doing? He was building bridges and making alliances even when Muslims were a persecuted minority. He was starting long-term relationships. People treat Islam as if it were a done deal. They want to impose it from top down. They expect us to practice every single tenet of the faith down to the last detail. They want to crush Muslims under the weight of a mountain. Wrong approach. Dead wrong. Not Islamic and not prophetic. For all their shortcomings, Master W.D. Farad knew better, and Elijah Muhammad knew better. You don't come into a community and demand that they fulfill endless religious duties. You must never demand and demand and demand and give nothing in return. Some Christians come with a spoon in one hand and the Bible in the other. The Muslims just hit you over the head with the Quran and expect you to turn the hood into an Islamic state. You need to start with the most basic of things. Who cares if you pray all the time, fast months at a time, go on pilgrimage every year, and beat yourselves black and blue, crying over Imam Hussein? If you have no care for the suffering and the indigent, if your heart is closed up like a fist, when was the last time you cried for an orphan child? When was the last time you fostered or adopted a child? When was the last time you helped the homeless and fed the hungry face to face? When was the last time you gave refuge to a battered woman? When was the last time that you freed a slave? There are millions of slaves, sex slaves around the world, and nearly 500,000 here in the United States. Over 100,000 girls are trafficked in this country every year. Child porn is a multi-billion-dollar industry. You want to do jihad? That's the jihad. The jihad against pimps, pedophiles, child pornographers, and sex traffickers. You want to be a man? Alhamdulillah, take on these criminal cartels. If you can do this, then you might learn one of the things that fasting and prayer are for, to give you the power to do good in the face of the world's evil without giving up. Because you know that there is no might nor power except in Allah, that your individual weakness is the door to His strength, that your intrinsic poverty is the door to His bounty. It was not you who threw when you threw, but God threw. So, we do not impose an Islamic state from above. We build it from the ground up. You do not build the roof first, you build the foundation. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and his family created a community, spiritual and socially committed. It was not an Islam of laws. It was not a form of political Islam. It was an Islam of spirituality and ethics. As a result of his outreach and diplomatic efforts, the people of Yathrib, which would soon become known as Madinah al-Nabi, the city of the Prophet, reached out to him, offered him not only refuge, but a position of leadership. The Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, was no dictator. He was not indirectly elected. He was directly elected by the consensus of the community, a community that was predominantly non-Muslim. At that time, there were only about 300 Muslim men in Medina. They were about 10% of the population. The rest of the population was equally divided between Jews and non-Muslim Arabs. There was also a Christian minority in the city. Did the Prophet Muhammad impose Islamic law on the people of Medina? Absolutely not. Islamic jurisprudence only became fully developed approximately 300 years after the Prophet. Everything at that time of beginning was seminal, burgeoning, and incipient. The first thing he did was strive for social solidarity. He built a mosque to unite the believers. He fostered bonds of brotherhood between the refugees, the muhajirin, and their hosts and helpers, the Ansar. Many communities think that the mosque must come first, the Islamic school must come second, and so on and so forth. They neglect the need to connect with the broader community of non-Muslims. You need to move from being outsiders to insiders. The Prophet never created a Muslim enclave or ghetto as immigrants from North Africa, the Middle East, and Asia have done in Europe. He integrated them. He placed them at the heart of the community. He even relocated the market in Medina to ensure social and political interaction between the various faith communities. A spiritual guide, a political strategist, and an economist at once. God bless the Prophet Muhammad, salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The Messenger of Allah then proceeded to create a constitution, the first written constitution in the history of humanity, known variably as Ahd al-Madinah, the Covenant of Medina, Mithaq al-Madinah, the Treaty of Medina, or Dustur al-Madinah, the Constitution of Medina. The document is revolutionary. All the rights that we take for granted in the Western world trace back directly or indirectly to the Covenant of Medina and the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad with the people of the book. You may have heard of Thomas Jefferson's Quran. Well, alhamdulillah. But have you heard about the covenants of the Prophet of Thomas Jefferson? Thomas Jefferson actually had numerous copies of the covenants of the Prophet. Okay? My discovery, peer-reviewed, read it, praise the Prophet, and praise the Lord. We are taught to believe that human knowledge, including knowledge of history, increases by leaps and bounds every year. Nonetheless, we have very little idea of how much history has actually been forgotten in the process. Why? Precisely because it has been forgotten. The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, and the Bill of Rights are more closely aligned with the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad than the constitutions of most Muslim countries. Once again, it goes back to those Meccan basics. Who cares if you force women to wear hijab and whip them if they show a strand of hair? Do you think that makes you a Muslim? Who cares if you stone women to death and hang people who disagree with your politics? Do you think that makes you a Muslim? How about basic morals and ethics? How do you treat women? Do you honor, respect, and revere them? How do you treat the poor? Have you provided economic justice? How do you treat children? Do you care for orphans? How do you treat refugees? Do you welcome them as brothers and sisters or receive them with racism? For the record, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, never forced anyone to do anything. He encouraged them. Forcing women to wear hijab is not an accomplishment. As far as I'm concerned, it's an institutionalized imposition of hypocrisy. Inspiring women to be modest, now that's an accomplishment, and that's what the Prophet did. You cannot ram religion down the throats of the people. You cannot drag them to heaven kicking and screaming, when perhaps you are really leading them to hell in this life and the next. When you combine politics and religion, both become cross-contaminated. We need to create a civil society first and foremost. What good is an Islamic state if there is nothing Islamic about its leaders and its people? And we have plenty of examples. According to the methodology of the Prophet Muhammad, spiritual development and religious discipline must proceed in stages. The same applies socially and politically. It cannot be too much too fast. When it comes to spiritual nourishment, you do not give meat to a baby. Religion must not be a burden greater than people can bear. The Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, said, make things easy for the people. You do not make people hate Islam, hate religion, and hate the scholars of religion. Be careful not to destroy religion through the imposition of religion. Meet people where they are and build them up slowly, steadily, and gradually. Take them as far as they can go, but no higher. People can only bend so much, otherwise they snap. A little goes a long way. People have limitations. A murshid or spiritual guide cannot expect a seeker to attain fana billah or annihilate himself in God without nourishment of the heart, education of the soul, and growth in the spirit. Does a crop mature overnight? Are you going to whip the ground hoping to intimidate it into sprouting? Does a date seed become a palm tree bearing dates in the space of a month? You can't shoot a man into space without a spaceship. You will blow him to smithereens. You need a vehicle. But the man must also be trained as an astronaut to endure the journey. Otherwise, he will never reach his goal. The greatest spiritual guide of all was Muhammad, the messenger of Allah. How did he care for his flock, school his students, and guide the growth of his followers? Well, they endured baptism by fire for over a decade in Mecca. They endured persecution, violence, and exile. They stood side by side with people of color, slaves, women, orphans, and the poor. They stood their ground against the rich, the racists, and the sexists. Like Moses, Muhammad led the Muslims to the Holy Land, which was Medina. He never tried to create a state in Mecca. The conditions were not ripe. His people were not ready. He created the people first, then he created the state. But it was not an Islamic state as people understand it today. It was a pluralistic state. It was a civil society. It was a confederation of believers. Its leader was directly elected by the people, invited and encouraged criticism, and was even willing to change and modify rules and regulations in response to requests from his constituents. What is more, he was re-elected on a yearly basis. If an infallible prophet of God could be held accountable, then fallible human beings must also be held accountable. The people have a voice and the people have a choice when it comes to political models, because ultimately it is not the model that matters, but the principles that it promotes and the rights and freedoms that it grants. It is not about imposing Sharia law. It is about upholding values. I would recommend that you all read the Islamicity Index. You will find that many non-Muslim countries reflect Islamic values better than Muslim countries. And if you don't agree with me, then why are you here? If your countries are so more Islamic, and if you're such good Muslims, then you should go live there. But I choose to live here, and you all choose to live here, because believe it or not, the founding fathers shared my Islamic values, right? We are concerned about rights, values, freedom, okay? That's what we're looking for ultimately. So how did the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and his family proceed? Well, in year one, he created a constitution, imposed from above, no. In consultation with the community. It was a collective enterprise. The Muslim minority had to approve. The Jews, who represented half the population, had to approve. And the pagan Arabs, who represented the other half of the population, also had to approve. Can you imagine the diplomatic acumen that is required to get all these diverse parties to buy into the Constitution of Madinah? It was not something that was forced. After all, the Prophet had no army. Approximately 300 Muslim families followed him at that point. So about 1,500 people. The rest of them, numbering 10,000, were non-Muslims. Approximately 4,000 Jews and 4,500 Arab polytheists during the early years in Medina. So what are you worried about? You are minorities, we are minorities, big deal. So was the Prophet, his family, and his companions. That never prevented them from promoting values and working with others who shared them. So get out there, get engaged, and be active in the community. Not the Muslim community, not the Lebanese community, not the Pakistani community, not the Iraqi community. Get out there and become part of the American community. Make friends and allies. You want to follow the Sunnah? That's the Sunnah. It's the Sunnah of compassionate social action. This is the meaning of when you pray, pray with your hands. All right? As we say in Spanish, quien no vive para servir, no sirve para vivir. He who does not live to serve does not deserve to live. The Constitution came first. It enshrined the principles that he had developed in his followers for over a decade. It was only 1.5 years later that the 5 daily prayers were instituted. Prayers are important. However, they are not always the first priority. First, you need to create conditions in which people can pray. And second, you need to create a spiritual state in which they wish to pray. You don't beat people into praying. You don't force a hungry person to pray. You don't expect a homeless person to pray. You don't expect a slave or a prisoner to pray. You get them on their feet. You get the people on their feet. You get a community on its feet, and then you don't have to force them to pray. You don't even have to encourage them to pray. They will pray willingly. They will be drawn to prayer. They will be so grateful to God that they will pray even more than they're required to pray. In year 2, Muslims who were previously pacifists were permitted to fight in self-defense. You don't just send someone off to war without proper physical and spiritual training. You don't cast yourself into destruction. The calls to jihad made by Islamists in positions of weakness have been foolish, strategically unsound, self-destructive, and suicidal. The Prophet never called upon individual actors or small groups of zealots to revolt against the Byzantines and the Persians. He only took them on when he had created an ummah, a motherland, a state, and had allies. Hence, in year 2, the Prophet made an alliance with the Christians of the Sinai. In year 3, the zakat was made obligatory. Prior to that, some could not afford it. In year 4, alcohol was prohibited after initially being discouraged for over a decade. It was a gradualist approach. In the same year, he granted covenants to Christian communities in southern Arabia, namely Najran, also Egypt, Syria, Assyria, and Persia. In year 5, a code of modest dress was developed. In year 6, he made a peace treaty with the polytheists. In year 9, he entered covenants with religious communities from throughout the world. They included Jews, Samaritans, Christians, Sabians, and Zoroastrians. To his dying day, he was making treaties and alliances with other faith communities. I am painting a picture, grosso modo, namely in general fashion. A survey, as one would say. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him and his family, produced hundreds of letters, treaties, and covenants. And they were not only concluded with the people of the book. When dealing with Jews, Samaritans, Christians, and Zoroastrians, he offered them dhimma, namely divine protection, a social contract, the protection of God and his prophet. He also offered them jiwar, or neighborly protection, as well as aman, or security. In short, if we claim to follow the example of the greatest example, we are called upon as Muslims to protect the peaceful people of the book and treat them as neighbors. As Almighty Allah says in the glorious Quran, we have indeed in the messenger of God a beautiful pattern of conduct for anyone whose hope is in God in the final day and who engages much in the praise of God. So I invite you all to follow this beautiful pattern. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
I really appreciate it. One more salawat to say thank you to our guest. Appreciate the conclusion as well, and you saved me time from drawing a conclusion. Is it working now? Okay. And here's what we're going to do.
Maybe we don't need it.
Yeah, we don't.
Get the mic.
We've had a really good blueprint of what the Prophet tried to do in regard to humanity, civility, and all of the other attempts to create that spiritual society and through spirituality and ethics. So right now is really a good time, if you will, to ask any questions. We want to keep them short so we can keep it engaging. Please refrain from giving speeches or giving comments or anything like that. Just quick questions if you don't mind. Please go ahead.
Yeah. You know, as Islamic religion meet with other religion in a number of values and principles. And the most important one is we all agree in the existence of one and absolute God. And we all fight the tyranny and oppressor and injustice. And we all also share a good family values. Do we have a common place in which we can work together to produce and form a strong and unbreakable society? Society has no problems such as domestic violence or substance abuse or sex traffic or divorce problems, and thank you.
Well, I don't think it's realistic to expect to create some sort of utopia, right? That's part of the human condition. But we have to strive to create a society that upholds these values and principles. We're always going to struggle with these issues. With domestic violence and substance abuse and so on. These are not things that are going to disappear. It's just how are we going to address these issues and deal with them.
Good evening. If you look at the Revelations, the Meccan Revelations, you notice that the Quran was so soft and the Christian community, because there was no Jewish community, the concentration of that, there wasn't yet at that time. But when the Prophet migrated to Medina, the first year he did that covenant, which considered the Jews and the Christians as part of the believers. But 2 years later, if you look at the chapter 5 of the Quran and verse 81, God condemns the Jews. Can you elaborate on this, please?
We have to avoid an atomistic interpretation of the Quran, okay? Just focusing on a word or on a sentence. As the Sayyid was mentioning, we have to place everything in proper context, okay? Interpret the Quran by the Quran. And not just, that actual section, but in light of the entire Quran, all right? Because otherwise, this becomes very perilous. So there are over 150 verses in the Quran promoting tolerance and pluralism and all kinds of beautiful positive things. And there are Muslim scholars out there that believe that all of essentially the good parts of the Quran have been abrogated by the verse that says, kill them right where you find them. Right? So this is a gross injustice to the text of the Quran. God, it is not a good thing for us to generalize. Do you understand? And say, oh, Arabs are like this, or black people are like this, or Hispanics are like that. So if this is not acceptable for us to do as human beings, it's not something acceptable for God to be doing. To just condemn people, issue a blank statement that all Jews are evil and all Jews are bad and they're treacherous. So you have to go back to the reasons of revelation and understand why these things were revealed and who it was revealed about. Okay. you know, the Banu Nadir, the Banu Qurayza, and Banu Qaynuqa, and these people. All right. What happened is not entirely clear. All right. Now, there are some scholars who believe that there was one period of conflict. Some scholars believe there were several instances of conflict. But there are also historians and Muslim scholars who question whether that conflict actually took place, or this is something that was fabricated hundreds of years later by the Abbasids as a precedent in order to justify their discriminatory policies towards Jewish people. And, you know, perhaps they did the same thing with Christian people. So this has been the subject of peer-reviewed articles. This has been the subject of scholarly works. It is not entirely clear what happened with the Jews of Medina. But we do know that, okay, let us assume that one of these tribes betrayed the Prophet. Okay, so the condemnation would apply to those people. It wouldn't apply collectively to all Jewish people. Because we know that the Prophet continued to have good relations with the Jews from the Yemen. And the Jewish communities in the Yemen have transmitted covenants of protection from the Prophet since the 7th century all the way to our time. They've been transmitted through rabbinical families and so on. And we know even from our sources that towards the end of the Prophet's life, he was still making treaties with Jewish people. Okay? I can refer you to the Treaty of Madinah. Okay? And so this was in northwestern Arabia. This was a Jewish community, and the Prophet said that he had forgiven them all of their wrongdoings. He said that they would not be ruled by anyone except one of their own leaders or a member from my Ahl al-Bayt. So we have this in our sources, that he continued to make treaties with Jewish people, he made treaties with Samaritans and so on. So perhaps this applied to one specific group of traders, but it cannot, we cannot just, you know, paint broadly and apply this to every single Jewish person, you know, throughout all of history and all time to come. All right? So, thank you. A little bit long, but I think you get the gist of it.
Wonderful. If I may, just add an example.
Is this a realistic interpretation, Doctor, or just elaborate on a vague answer? Because the Jews is a collective word in that verse.
Listen, you know, with all due respect, there are good Jews and there are bad Jews, there are good Muslims and there are bad Muslims.
It doesn't say that. It says
No, you know, the Quran also says no fear shall be upon them, nor shall they grieve, and there's all kinds of positive things referring to Jewish people in Ahl al-Kitab in the Quran. So with all due respect, I think you're taking a verse out of context and generalizing it.
Made them worse than the Bacon's one. It first out with the Jews, then the Lady Ashra.
I'd like to add this example. So, again.
No, this issue has to be addressed
Okay.
in a realistic way.
We are here to listen.
Okay.
Thank you for your comment. As the doctor said, we have to read Quran and take it subjectively, not collectively, from A to Z. Then, based on the subject, we get the result and conclusion. Now, as an example, وَلَنْ تَرْضَى عَنْكَ الْيَهُودُ وَلَا النَّصَارَى حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَهُم. None of them, neither Jewish or Christian, they will not accept you unless you follow them. حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَهُم. While other ayah in Quran also says, وَلَتَجِدَنَّ أَقْرَبَهُمْ مَوَدَّةً لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا الَّذِينَ قالوا إننا نصارى ذلك بأن منهم قسيسين ورهبانا وأنهم لا يستكبرون. So if you take a full picture, I'm very sure you will have different results.
Thank you, Sayyid. Here's a question. How do modern scholars, Western scholars, view the covenants?
Well, to answer that question, it could take hours.
Let's try to do it in 2 minutes.
Okay, that's fine. I can point you to a 3-volume encyclopedia called Islam and the People of the Book, Critical Studies on the Covenants of the Prophet, that was published several years ago. There is a chapter there called The Provenance of the Covenants of the Prophet, the provenance of the Prophet's covenants. In that study, I have tracked every single reference to the covenants of the Prophet in dozens of different languages from the 7th century until the 21st century. Okay? So it is a very long chapter, hundreds of pages, but there are tables there with just the name of the authority and their conclusion, whether the documents were authentic, whether they considered them to be apocryphal. And so and I've done that for every single, every major covenant. And so you can get a quick overview of the scholarly assessment of these documents over the course of 14 centuries. And you will notice that, yes, there were some people here and there who questioned them, who thought that they were perhaps forgeries. But you will find that overwhelmingly, scholars past and present have concluded that these documents are indeed genuine. All right, so I would refer you to that study. Thank you.
Thank you. Doctor?
I truly enjoyed your lecture.
Thank you.
It's new, no ideas, no thoughts, no explanation. We really appreciate it. And thank you. I would like to get a copy of it, and I think maybe Imams can make a copy of it, make it available to all of us. Sometimes when we hear something different from what we have learned, we object to it. I think we should open our eyes and ears and listen to something new. I want to thank you, and I appreciate it, Imam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions from the audience, but first of all, in the name of Imam, I want to thank you, Doctor. And I want to refer to our Facebook page where we are broadcasting online, and then you can find the video online as well. And as well, any contact, we're here.
But
We'll try to do that.
Format, in a written form.
Sure, we'll try to do that. Okay, the first question from the audience, and this goes for the Sayyid and the Doctor as well. How does the jizya compare to the current day's taxes? And then another question from the audience as well. How did the people elect the prophet every year? So two separate questions.
Thank you.
All right, sure, that's fine. I would begin with the issue of jizya and how it compares to a current paid tax. All right. So, everyone pays taxes, right? So two things are certain, right? That we pay taxes and we die. All right. So states impose taxes. All kinds of taxes were imposed on Muslims. You had the zakat. You had the khums. There were other taxes as well, like land taxes and property taxes, like kharaj and ushur and so on. There was a tax called the jizya that was applied to the Ahl al-Kitab or the Ahl al-Dhimma, all right? Why was this tax? Well, first of all, how did it compare to the taxes that were imposed on Muslims? This has been studied by Dr. Muhammad Hamidullah, and he revealed that the rate of the jizya, the rate of taxes paid by the people of the book, actually ended up being lower than the tax burden that was imposed on Muslims. So this whole idea that it was an oppressive tax and so on is not supported by the historical evidence over the ages. There were some cases of despotic rulers who oppressed Christians and overtaxed them, but they're the same people who are oppressing their Muslim citizens and overtaxing them as well. But in general, it was actually lower than what was imposed on the Muslims. Now, the jizya, was it something that was universal? Well, actually, no. There were some Arab Christians who protested. They said, we refuse this, this is humiliating. And the early caliph said, okay, fine. Umar said, all right, we're not going to give you the jizya tax, we'll just give you the standard tax that we're imposing on the Muslims. Why was this tax imposed? Well, it was in order to exempt Jews and Christians from serving in the military. Now, if you think about this, you think about the logic, it makes a lot of sense. During the early days of Islam, who were the Muslims fighting against? They were fighting against the Byzantine Empire. They were fighting against Christians. And so the Muslims felt a bit uncomfortable sending Christians to fight fellow Christians. Be it they were hostile against the Ummah, they thought that this was potentially problematic and that they didn't want to impose them on it. So the jizya was paid in order to exempt them from military service. But we do have some ahadith, even from our imams, indicating that a dhimmi, a kitabi, who serves in the army, in the Muslim army, is exempted from the jizya tax. So this is not something that is universal, and eventually the caliphs decided to abolish it. You'll see over the course of history, they were moving more toward this concept of citizenship, right? Being more and more inclusive. So in the early days, the term Ahl al-Kitab referred to Christians, and it referred to Jews, and it referred to Samaritans. But then they came across the Majus and so on, and the Zoroastrians, and there was some debate. But they decided, you know what, we're going to consider them Ahl al-Kitab. But then Islam continued to spread, and they came across Hindus, and Taoists, and Buddhists, and the ulama said, what do we do with these people? Some of them said, you know what, they received books, they had prophets, maybe they exaggerated their status like the Christians did with Jesus, and they turned them into gods and so on. And so maybe there's a potential there's a kernel of truth. So yeah, we'll consider them Ahl al-Kitab. Other ulama said, not too comfortable with the whole Ahl al-Kitab thing. Let's just include them in Ahl al-Zimma, right? Protected people, they're citizens, they're human beings. So, that's what I have to say about jizya. In terms of electing the prophet, okay, what do I mean about that? All right, so it is very clear that he did not impose himself on anyone. He was invited to go there. There was an enormous amount of strife in Yathrib. The Jews and the pagans had been at each other's throats. They had wars that would last centuries, and they heard about this man. What did they hear about him? They heard about those values that he was promoting. So these people weren't Muslims, most of them. So some of them said, yes, I accept this whole thing about one God and so on, and I'm taking the values. The other people said, I don't know about changing my religion, but I like these values. This is a good system. This might work. This might bring peace to our community. And so that they bought into it. And so he was invited there. Again, about 50% of the community was Jewish, 50% were Arab polytheists. Okay? So we can't say that all polytheists are bad people. In the same way we can't say all Jewish people are bad people. The Quraysh polytheists, real bad people, because they actually fought and killed the Muslims. But the polytheists in Yathrib said, you know what, we like you. We like these ideas and so on. Give us some time to digest these ideas. And you'll find that eventually all of them ended up embracing Islam. Some immediately, some it took them 5 years, some it took them 10 years. But he won their hearts over. Okay, so he didn't impose himself. He wasn't a dictator. He gathered all of these leaders. He composed this constitution. And they were all parties to it. All right. But on a yearly basis, the people would gather and they would pledge allegiance to him. Okay? This was bay'ah. So if this isn't consulting with the population, getting their input and so on, then what is? Okay? I'm not saying it's parliamentary democracy in the British style, but he was open to receiving feedback from the community. And we even have this in the Quran, and we have this in the Hadith, where the Muslims go to the Prophet, what are you talking about? I have to breastfeed for 2 years, and this is wajib on me, we're women, this is crazy. And he said, hold on, that's the maximum. You don't have to do that. And so he was flexible with people, right? He tried to make things easy with people. He was receptive. He didn't think that, So that's what I mean by being re-elected on a yearly basis. And this also continued. I mean, Imam Ali used to do the same thing, right? The people would come to him. And they had to wage battles. And the people, they didn't want to wage battles. They said, oh, it's too hot. We don't want to go to war, and so on. And he would shrug his shoulders, and he would say, oh, God, if only I had Muawiyah's followers. Those people didn't go to war like that. Okay? Not that they're good people, but they were more obedient. And so this whole thing about consulting with people and giving them the opportunity to voice their sentiments, I mean, you know, if you're a caliph and the overwhelming majority of your people don't want you in power and they don't like the system that you've introduced, any decent human being would say, I have done my very best, I'm going to retire from politics. And we find most of the A'imah is exactly what they did. They said that this system is hopelessly corrupt, we're going to promote the good, we're going to promote spirituality and religion, we're going to try to save Islam from the Muslims, right? To keep this religion and these teachings alive. So it's not always the political power that's the most important thing. It's preserving our teachings, these spiritual values and ethics.
Thank you. Thank you. You have a comment?
Yeah, thank Doctor for being here, and we've been benefit from we've been honored and benefit from your deep research. Actually, your research are very deep and very good. But I don't think everybody here understands the terminology in English that well. So I need like 3-5 minutes if anybody can give a like translation in English, conclusion in Arabic. If anybody can do that for Sayyid or Mr. Host. I thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Any other questions?
Can I follow with 1 minute? Do you have time?
So
Let's see if we
I
have
would
a-
just like to point out that my book, The Covenants of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of the World, has been translated and published in Arabic, وهود النبي للمسيحي العالم, published by Dar al-Kutub and al-Islami, I think, in Beirut, Lebanon. So, I mean, you can get it directly in your language from that source.
Yeah. Let's take a question, then we can come back to you.
Thank you, Doctor, for your informative lecture. I have a question about when you mentioned about the atheist or unbeliever when they bury their daughters. Yeah, you gave us like a new explanation why they like bury them. You said because they give them like slaughter for their god or the idol. Is this like your opinion or there is a fact or sources?
Yes, absolutely, Sheikhna. Thank you. I can point you to al-Waqidi. He speaks about this, about how the Arabs during the time of Jahiliyyah would sacrifice their children, their infants. This is something that you found in many parts of the world. Quite often it was the firstborn child that you would offer to the pagan gods. And so this existed also in Arabia. So it wasn't just a question of girls being undesirable and burying them alive. That took place, right? They would bury their daughters alive. But they also used to sacrifice them to their pagan gods. They used to sacrifice them in the Kaaba. And there was a pit there that they would cast their corpse into. And according to Waqidi, there was a beast that lived there. God knows what he meant. But that would devour the corpses of these infants. So we have this in Islamic sources, in Arabic sources. I was shocked when I read it myself, but I understood this is what the pagans were doing throughout the Middle East. That's why Almighty Allah sent the prophets to the children of Israel. That's why he sent Ilyas, Elijah, and Yasa, and so on. If you read the Old Testament, that's what was going on. So the same thing existed in Arabia, the same thing existed in Europe, it existed in the Americas. These were really dark times for humanity. So I mentioned one source that you could look up, the Kitab al-Maghazi of Waqidi, but also, you see, when I study Islam, I don't just study Islamic sources. I also study Christian sources and Jewish sources and so on, right? I want to know what other people were thinking and what they were saying, and whether what they say corroborates the Muslim accounts. And in the accounts from the monks from Mount Sinai, they have all kinds of chronicles going back thousands and thousands of years. They describe the Bedouins of the Sinai, who were Arabs, and their religion. It speaks that they used to worship Venus, that they used to worship Aphrodite, and these are just parallels with Allat and Uzza and so on, these female goddesses. So they talk about the Arabs as being goddess worshippers, and they mention this, that they were known for sacrificing their children to these goddesses. So we have it in Arabic Islamic sources. It's also mentioned in ancient Christian sources as well. So I think from a historical point of view, it's not questionable. And if they were to engage in archaeological studies in the Arabian Peninsula, all kinds of revelations would be made in regard to pre-Islamic Arabia and also the early Islamic period. But unfortunately, that hasn't been allowed. There's so much more that we can learn.
You were born Christian. What inspired you to become a Muslim?
That's a long story, and that's my least favorite question of all. But I've written about it and I've spoken about it. There's a book called Restoring the Balance, and there's a chapter in there called Nightmares in Takfiristan. It talks about my early experiences, which were not positive at all. I was in Toronto a week ago for the Milad al-Nabi there at Zafar Bangish's center, and I gave a speech in which I brought up many of these things. And so if that is uploaded to YouTube, perhaps you could listen to it. But I'll be publishing that speech in a forthcoming book as well. But that's all I'll say about that.
We're going to take one last question. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Sayyid, for this great opportunity. Thank you, Doctor, for this valuable wealth of information. Very well said. I just I want to connect what the Honorable Sayyid said about that you have to take the example of the Prophet in his life. And you said also the pattern. So one can make both of these terms that are very true. And this is where we can also understand the relation between the Prophet ﷺ and all other communities, as you said, miraculously said, the minorities. So I want to ask you about the marriages of, quickly, not that you see in his everyday life, he got married and with one Jew, Safiya, and two other Christians, and maybe one, which is Maria al-Qibtiyya, and also, as you know, Khadija, Sayyida Khadija bint Khuwaylid, she has a cousin who was a priest, Waraka bin Nawfal, and he was, as the biography of the Prophet says, he was a testimony, he was the witness of the Prophet's sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was the witness in his marriage, and he grew as on the pre-prophecy era. He grew with these first acquaintances. His uncle Abu Talib and Waraka bin Nawfal and Khadija and the daughter Zainab, Kulthum and Fatima Zahra. So I want to ask you this example. Did you first of all know, you write about it in the book, in your book, and how you can tell us what's the meaning of all this? Means that the Prophet was really very close to Christians, or he was very open-minded since the beginnings. Since the era of the pre-prophecy era. Thank you.
You've been doing an entire lecture on the marriages of the Prophet and written books about this, and scholars have written books about this. But yes, I think it indicates that he was a very open-minded man. He married women of different ages. Many of the women he married were widows. So women of different ages, with a different, one was a virgin, the others weren't virgins. They belonged to different races, different ethnic groups. So, yeah, it just shows how broad-minded and open-minded that he was, I think, yeah. It's not just, you don't just say, I oppose racism, okay? It's shallow. I mean, you show it through practice. And, divorced women, widows, and so on were not desirable. And when you actually marry these women, it sends a different message, right? So yes, there are so many things, so many lessons that we can learn from the Prophet. Peace and blessings be upon him.
Thank you, Dr. Morrow. Really appreciate it. Sayyid, do you have a final comment?
Thank you.
Okay. Small gift of saying thank you. Thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it. Let's say loud salawat. Thank you, the doctor. Say something for the doctor. Sure, make sure this is right. And Sheikh Halabi as well.
مولانا سنة الله يعزك يا
سيد عبد الستار